When it comes to lowering your truck, you've got a lot of options. There's not just one way to do it. Today on Andy's Autosport TV, we're going to show you what it takes to put your truck in the weeds. Today we're going to talk about lowering your pickup truck. We're going to show you the components that you need, explain what they do. We're going to install them on our Project Chevrolet truck. We got all Western chassis components that we hand-picked. We're going to start at the back, move to the front, and at the end we're going to show you the results. Front and rear suspension components are completely different when it comes to lowering products. For the front, you can lower with lowering springs, drop spindles, or even lower control arms, or a combination of all three. Now, a drop coil spring is just basically a shorter spring, usually has a higher load level, and it just replaces the factory spring. Another great way to lower your truck is a lowering spindle. This allows you to actually lower your truck without changing the spring travel and shock travel. How this works, like this one from Western Chassis, they actually cast the pin higher in the spindle itself. Another great option is lowering control arms. Now what this does is this allows the spring to sit lower in the pocket by raising the lower ball joint. They come in a set of 4, usually uppers and lowers. This will really help later on down the line with alignment issues. Also will really help eliminate bump steer. When it comes to the rear, depending on your application, there are a lot of options. You can use lowering block kits, shackle kits, spring hangers, leaf springs, or even a flip kit. Or in our case, if you really want to slam your truck, you can use a combination of them. Lowering block kits are an easy way to lower your truck. Basically, it's a piece of metal that you bolt between the leaf spring and the axle housing. They come with new U-bolts. They come in a variety of widths depending on the width of your leaf spring, and they come in increments of 1 to 4 inches. Drop hangers are another way to lower your vehicle. Now, what you do with a drop hanger, you basically grind these rivets off. The hanger actually rebolts in place and actually moves the eye of the spring up higher. Now on the other side of the leaf spring you have a shackle. This is another way to lower the vehicle. This is a lowering shackle. What this does is it bolts and takes the place of this one, and then you have a couple of different height adjustments which will in turn lower your truck. Now if your axle is mounted below the leaf spring and you want a really dramatic drop, you're going to want a flip kit. Now it doesn't actually flip anything. What it does is it relocates the axle from the bottom of the leaf spring to the top. Now this is usually going to get you about 6 inches. What happens is this little cradle right here, after all this is unbolted, will bolt to the top. The axle will actually sit inside of that. This plate will go on the bottom, and of course the leaf springs will hold it all together. This is only if your axle starts out on the bottom of your leaf spring. If it's on the top already, the lowering blocks are going to do the trick. Okay, so another component that we haven't mentioned is called a notch kit or a C-notch. Now this doesn't actually lower your vehicle at all. What it does do is it gives additional clearance if you're really going to slam your vehicle. Like we're going to put the flip kit on this where the axle comes to the top. Obviously there's not going to be a lot of room here. So what we do is this piece goes up here. We'll notch the frame out right there. And that's going to give us extra clearance when we really drop this truck. You may be wondering if it is okay to mix and match brands when lowering your truck. The answer is yes. Let's say, for example, you want to order a set of Beltec 3-inch lowering springs and the MaxTrack 2-inch lowering spindle. That's not a problem because they both serve different functions. A lot of people just want to lower the rear of their truck to make it level with the front. Now, rear lowering products don't adversely affect anything except possibly pinion angle, so you can use any of the lowering products you want to get the desired stance that you're looking for. The easiest and cheapest way to lower the rear of your vehicle is either lowering blocks or a shackle kit. So if you want to level the rear of your truck with the front, here's what you need to do. First of all, you need to make sure that all your tires are at their proper pressure level. This will affect how the truck sets. Then you take a tape measure, go from level ground to the top of your fender well, which we can see right here is 32.5 inches. We'll do the exact same thing on the rear, and we're going to measure, and this says we're at 34.5 inches. So in order to level our vehicle, we're going to need to drop the back 2 inches. Now in our case, what we want to do is we don't want to just lower our truck, we want to slam it. Now, the best way to determine what it's going to look like is just with a simple tape measure. So what you do is just take your tape measure. Now, there's different ideas on how to do that. Some people say go from the center of the wheel. And if you have a flat center cap, that's probably not a bad idea. I just like to choose from the top of the tire. Now, in this particular instance, after we do our measuring, we've decided that we want to drop the front 5 inches and then do the back 7. Now, the best way to do this is to make sure that you have the wheels and tires that you're going to run. Our factory wheels and tires are actually about 2 inches taller than these. So we've chosen to put the wheels and tires that we're going to run on this vehicle on here before we go ahead and do our measuring. If you go to andysautosport.com and you really want to slam your truck like we do, you're probably not going to find an all-in-one kit. It's not a problem. All you need to do is mix and match. Now, we know that we want to drop the front end 5 inches. So what we did is we chose a Western Chassis 3-inch lowering spring and 2-inch drop spindle. For the rear, Western Chassis makes a notch kit and a flip kit. So we're going to put that on the back. That's going to give us 6 inches. We have a Shackle that's going to give us another inch. Now, since we're putting our truck in the weeds, we definitely need to change the shocks. If you are going to just lower your truck a little bit, you can technically use the factory shocks. Your ride will suffer a little bit. But if you're going to do an aggressive drop, it's going to be very uncomfortable and real bumpy. This is because the shocks in the front don't have enough stroke, and the shocks in the rear are probably at the wrong angle now to absorb those bumps. The solution is to replace your factory shocks with a set of shocks that is designed for custom lowered trucks. Companies like Magoy's, Beltec, Western Chassis, and Ground Force all have shocks available at andysautosport.com. If you take a look at the shocks category on the Andy's Autosport website, you can tell if the shocks you're looking at are designed for lowered truck because the product name will say drop shocks or something similar, or where it says fits on, the product will indicate the specific drop amount in inches. In our case, since we're slamming our truck, we're installing not only lowering shocks, but also shock extenders in the rear. Now, these allow the shocks to sit lower and operate in their optimal range. For our project, we have chosen Western Chassis for all of our parts. Now, these guys have been around forever. They're credited with designing and building the first drop spindle. We love their parts, and we're really looking forward to putting them on our truck, so let's get started. We've raised the truck. We went ahead and supported the back half of the chassis here. We've taken the tires off and we've supported the center rear end section. So what we're going to do now is we're going to loosen up our U-bolts that are holding the rear end to the leaf springs. Okay, so what we're doing now is we're going to remove the leaf spring. I've already done it on the other side. I've completely taken the leaf spring off, pulled out these eye bolts, okay, took the leaf spring off, and then I remounted the shackle side on there because this one catches from the bottom. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually raise the rear end up and then push our leaf spring back up underneath and put it back in the eye bolts. So we've already assembled our passenger side. Now we're going to work on the driver's side. Now, when we were showing you earlier, this piece right here goes up inside the old cradle, and then our leaf spring is going to come up underneath it, and we're going to clamp it all together. So what you want to do is you want to secure the rear end with safety stands. As you can see, we've got several around here. So when we're using a jack, you can do this with a floor jack. It's a little difficult, but you can do it. Just have plenty of safety stands, always safety first. So what we're going to do now is we're going to bolt this leaf spring up here with our plate and our new U-bolts. Okay, as you can see, we've got our flip kit done. Now this is going to drop us about 6 inches. That's what we're after on this. Now we redid some figuring and we realized that we actually need 8 inches of drop in the back. And so what we're going to do is we're going to put the 2-inch shackle on right now. The reason we need 8 is when we did our measuring, we actually only needed 5 and 7 because we wanted to level the truck. But our rear tires, it turns out, are going to be 1 inch taller than our front ones. So we want to get 8 so we can get that truck nice and level. So we're going to go ahead and put our drop shackles on here and put it on our second notch so we can drop this another 2 inches. Okay, now we're going to install our shock extenders. Now these are kind of an interference fit, so a hammer is probably going to be what you need in order to get these on the stock location. Now what they do is they pop up over where the factory shock was, and part of the bolts go there. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and install our shock. We're going to remove the old one. Now, as you can see, our new shocks are quite a bit shorter than our old ones. This should be just about the exact length that we need. But these shocks from Western are designed specifically for this flip kit and also these drop shackles, so they'll put them right in place. And our old shocks were worn out anyway. All right, and there we have our shock extender and our shock installed on our project pickup. All right, guys, we're getting ready to show you how to install the C-notch kit. Now, here's the thing. These can be very intimidating and nerve-wracking, but I got to tell you, it's not that bad. Here's the deal. Make sure you take your time. Just make sure you have the right tools and read the instructions, and you'll be just fine. We've already done the passenger side, got that all squared away. Not a big deal. Now we're going to show you exactly how to do it on the driver's side. Okay, now we're going to take these brackets off that are holding our brake line. You can see these. Now they're bolted in place. Also our wiring harness goes here too. So we're going to unbolt these so that we can relocate it once we put our notch kit in. Okay, now that we've got this out of the way, what we're going to do is we're going to grab our notch and we're going to line it up. Now, when you read the instructions, it will tell you that what you're supposed to do is take your notch, set it on here, and get it centered along the bump stop perch. Okay, so what you want to do is we're going to set this up here by hand, make sure that it lines up with our bump stop perch, and then we're going to mark on our chassis where we're going to cut. Then we're going to use our Sawzall and cut this out. We're going to leave this top portion of the frame, and we're going to cut all the rest of the C-channel out and angle it down so that our notch kit fits up nice and snug. All right, now we're going to take our notch and put it up next to our frame. Again, we're going to line it up and center it with our perch. I'm just going to mark along the frame. Okay, now before you cut your frame rail for your notch, you need to make sure that the rear of the truck is supported. Once you make this cut, the frame is going to try to sag. So what we've done is we actually have our truck jacked up right behind the cab, and then we raised it up. We put our jack stands under back there. If you can get them under the frame, that's perfect. And then you just lower the truck down to where there's just some dynamic tension, not a lot. You don't want it resting completely on the rear jack stands. You want it just to barely touch or just start touching to where it takes some tension off. And then once you start making your cut, if you notice that your blade is starting to get bound up in here, it's probably the back of that chassis sagging. So you lower the front of the truck down a little bit more to keep that from biting on your blade. Now we're going to see how well the notch fits. Now, following the instructions, there are bolts on the bottom of the C-notch right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually install these bolts first. These are the first holes that we're going to drill. So we're going to pop this up here. We're going to go underneath our truck and drill those holes first. Okay, now that we've got our 4 holes drilled, we're going to put our bolts in there and run those all the way up tight before we drill the top holes. Okay, now that we've got our bottom bolts installed, we can move on to the top, and then we can drill our bolts from the side. That way we have them lined up true and plumb. Now we're going to install our sandwich plate and tighten our bolts down. Okay, now we've got our sandwich plate on there. Now we're going to rearrange our brake line and bend that around and our wiring so that we can get that out of the way and keep it out of the way of our C-channel. Now we're going to move our brake line and get that to where it's situated where we can get it mounted back into place. Now what we're going to do is we've got some excess line here. If you accidentally kink this line, do not try to unkink it. Just go out and buy another piece. It'll save you a bunch of hassle because once they're kinked, they're done. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pull on this a little bit and take this little bend out of it. And just be real gentle with it. Do it by hand. You don't need any special tools or anything for it. But you want to do it slowly. Anytime you're bending line, you want to do this really slowly so you don't go too far with it. Bends really easily. Okay, now that we've got our brake line back in place, we still have our wiring harness to deal with. Now, we have our brake line, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to zip tie this. We have a little problem over here. We have a zip tie over here from the factory. We're going to cut that and get this line up a little bit because, as you can see, it'll be right in the middle of our notch kit, which isn't going to work very well for us. So we're going to go ahead and cut that zip tie, and we'll put a couple more up here to hold it out of the way of the C-channel. Now we're zip tying on either side of the C-channel. The reason that we're doing this obviously is so that it can't fall down in between there. So now we've got that up out of our way. We'll switch to the underside over here because our bed is going to be on here, and again, we don't want that to rub up against anything. That should keep everything in place and out of the way of the rear end as it travels up and down inside the C-notch. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to notch this support brace for the bed right about here. Now the reason that we're doing this is our new sandwich plate sits about 2 inches higher than the original frame. We know that's going to interfere. So we're just going to cut this part of the channel out and get rid of that, and so that it all fits in there nice and snug. So we've got the bed back on, we've got all of our suspension components on, and as you can see, without our notch kit, our axle housing would already be interfering with the frame. Now that we've got the back in the weeds, let's put our Western chassis springs, spindles, and shocks and drop the front. Okay, so we gave you a basic overview of our Western chassis components that we're going to be installing on our truck. We're getting ready to do our drop spindles. Now, anytime you do any kind of modification to your vehicle, here's what I recommend. Read the instructions first. This will save you hassle later. For example, for our Western chassis drop spindles, one of the things that's going to happen is we're going to relocate. Our caliper is going to stay in the same location here, but once I get this off, I'll show you. This actually is higher up, so now the brake line is going to interfere with the upper ball joint bolt. So in the instructions, it tells us to bend that line. Now that line's a whole lot easier to bend while it's connected than it is when it's taken off. So you want to read your instructions first. It'll save you a little hassle as you're doing your job. We're going to start by removing our shock. I've already taken the top bolt off. That's from up under the hood. Okay, one of the things you're going to need to do is, before you ever loosen up an upper or lower ball joint, this is very, very important. This is a huge safety factor here, guys. You're going to need to get a spring compressor, okay? This is very, very, very important. If you start breaking ball joints loose top and bottom, this spring is under a tremendous amount of pressure, even though we have it unloaded, and that thing will pop out, can cave in your chest. I mean, it's very, very dangerous. There's a lot of pressure there. So you're going to need to get a spring compressor. You can usually rent one of these, or we do sell them at andysautosport.com. You can pick them up on the web. It's real important that you compress your spring before you start loosening ball joints. Now, these things are kind of a pain in the neck. To get up in there, you've got to hold your mouth just right and get your hand inside of a spring and take these and kind of keep them compressed together, and their whole job is to come apart. So you got to kind of hold them together and then feed them up through the spring by hand. You want to get them as high up on the spring as you possibly can. Now the bottom one is just basically on a it's a sleeve type deal. So you have to get one side in and kind of wiggle it around so you can get the other side in. And you'll know when the spring is compressed enough because it'll actually be loose in the pocket. Okay, now that we've got our spring loose in the cradle, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start working on those ball joints and knock those loose. Now each one of them has cotter pins in there, and we're going to have to pull those out first, and we'll show you how to go about all that as we go along. Now we're ready to knock our ball joints loose. Now here's one of the things that I always do, and this is an important safety tip and something you should always do. Always leave that castle nut on there about half the nut. Basically what that's going to do is, in case that spring, now our spring is loose, we know that. In case there's a little bit of dynamic tension in there, this will catch that and keep that spring from ending up in your face. Same thing on the top one, you just want to leave a little bit of thread on there so that when you start knocking it around, if it comes loose, it doesn't get you. That basically gets our tie rod end loose. Now, before we pull the rest of our assembly off, we're going to go ahead and take off our spindle and caliper assembly. Going to pull back our brake caliper a little bit so we have a little bit of room for our pads to slide in and out of there, give us a little bit of a cushion. This would be a great time to replace your brake pads if you needed them. I have another cotter pin assembly in here. Okay, now we're going to take our backing plate off. Now, it's important that you put this backing plate back on. This right here is for the anti-lock brake system. So this whole plate assembly, including this, you need to make sure you don't fray this cable. You'll get an ABS light on in your dash. So you want to make sure you take good care of this part. Now, all four of these bolts, this one actually is blind, so it doesn't actually connect to anything. It has a nut behind it. And this one connects to the spindle. So you just need to take these three out. Set that aside. Now we can push our lower control arm, pull our factory spring out. Okay, now that we have the factory spindle off and the factory coil spring, we thought we'd show you the difference. Now this one from Western Chassis, you can see it's a great product. They are absolutely top shelf. And what they've done with this is they've taken the factory design and then they've just raised the spindle up 2 inches. This is going to give us our 2-inch drop on the spindle. It's a great product. Another thing we're changing, we're going to the Western Chassis coil springs. Now these are supposed to drop us about 3 inches. So as you can see, there's probably not 3 inches here. What's going to happen once this goes in, the spring's going to settle and that'll get us the extra 3 inches we need. So we should end up with about a 5-inch drop on the front. So we're going to go ahead and install our coil spring. Now remember, you do not want to forget to put this back on there. It has a witness mark as where it was sitting before, and that's where you want to put it back on there. It'll fit in there nicely. In order to put this in there, you've got to push your lower control arm down, get the spring up in the pocket. There's also a witness mark on the bottom of your lower control arm here. You can see where the end of the spring is supposed to go. So you want to make sure you get that rotated to where it fits in there about the same as it was before. So now that we have that on there, we'll go ahead and install our spindle. Put our rotor assembly in place. Make sure our pads are in our brake caliper still. Okay, now we've got our assembly back together. Now, one of the things, remember, we had to bend this brake line, and you want to make sure that it's not touching or anywhere interfering with anything on the suspension. So that'll cause it to fray. So you go full range of motion just to take a look. Everything is free and clear. Okay, we still need to install our shocks. What we're going to do is we're going to actually mount our wheel and tire on here, put the vehicle back down here, and then we'll climb back underneath this to put our shocks on. All right, now that we've got our truck on the ground and we can actually get our top bolt, we'll actually go through the frame like it's supposed to. We're going to put our Western Chassis DS2 lowering shocks on the front. All right, we got our components installed on our pickup truck. We got her in the weeds. We're going to try to take her for a spin, see if we can miss all the roly-polies. We hope you've learned something today, and we'll see you on another episode of Andy's Autosport TV.